Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Hill. I'm the marketing director here at NextAfter. Thank you for enjoying the tunes while you wait. Tim likes to refer to that song as the optimization theme song, because if we're doing things right, if we're optimizing our pages and our emails, everybody will be dancing for sure. So thanks again for being here. If you're just tuning in, people are sounding off in the chat for where in the world or in the country they're listening in from or watching. So feel free to keep doing that. We're actually going to use that chat box a bunch today in order to ask questions live. But before we dive into all the details, there's a few things I do want to cover. Number one, this is the most popular question. Will there be a recording? The answer is yes, we are recording this webinar. We will post this for you to watch back later, especially if there's a question that comes up and you think, you know what, my boss or my colleague or somebody on my team would really benefit from that answer. You can easily share this with them afterwards. So that's coming to you later around 5 p.m. this evening. What else we got? Let's see. We've got links to the slide deck and other featured resources that'll go out to you this evening as well, along with the recording, so you don't miss anything. If you miss a link or something, we'll send everything out to you, so don't worry about it. And then we have a bunch of questions that have been submitted beforehand. Most of you actually sent in questions, but we will have some time at the end for additional Q&A. If you didn't quite get a question in time, or you thought of one later, or something comes up throughout the day today where you want to dive deeper, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some additional Q&A. And if you reach out to us via email, we always love to have those conversations and respond too. As we're going through today, if you have a thought or a question or a concern or an idea or want to dive deeper, share your own commentary, feel free to use that chat feature that, again, you've been kind of sounding off in on the right side of your screen, or if you're on a mobile device, it should be below the player. A few shout outs here because I promised them. Looks like our very first person to share where they're tuning in from is Meeta from South India, it looks like, or at least the organization is based in South India, which is super cool. Charcoal. That sounds like a joke. But thank you so much for tuning in. We've got a bunch of people tuning in, and we're super grateful for you spending some time today. One last thing I wanted to make sure you know about before we get going is this. We have a virtual workshop coming up on May 27th called Intro to Online Fundraising Optimization. We have this as an on-demand course that you can take at courses.nextafter.com, but we're actually making some time so you can join a live version of this course on May 27th. So you don't have to worry about like plotting time over the next couple of weeks to make sure you go through the course. You can actually knock out the whole thing in one day with a live teacher, with classmates, opportunity to ask questions and dive deeper. And by the end, you'll take an exam and you'll get a certification in this course. Some things we'll cover: crafting your value proposition. We'll talk about email fundraising. We'll talk about how to grow your email file. We'll talk about some of these things today even, but we're going to get a lot deeper in this course. Donation page essentials, A/B testing, how to actually grow your program through optimization and testing. If you want to find out more about this, or actually if you're ready to register right now, go to nextafter.com/virtual workshop. You can find everything you need to know there. We'd love to spend the day with you and talk about fundraising. That's what we live for. Now, many of you asked, because in my invitation email, if you got that, I mentioned this rainbow wall that was a project that is helping keep me and my wife sane. And it is finished. This is the final picture, just in case you were tracking the progress. We were worried what it would look like when the tape came off, but it came off and was amazing. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, doesn't matter. We're going to keep moving on. But for those of you who have asked, there's the rainbow wall. Now, we've got a panel of 3 people from NextAfter. We've got Justin Beasley, Tim Katuriak, Courtney Gaines. I'm not going to share a lot about them. I'm going to let them share a little bit about themselves in an icebreaker here in a minute. But what they don't know is that the theme of today's webinar it's a little bit of like, whose line is it anyway? The webinar where all the questions are on the spot, and there will be points. The points don't really matter, but I will assign points after every round. So they didn't know that coming in, but now they know. Here's the rules. We've got 7 rounds of questions, all organized by different topics of things that you asked about. Each round is timed, so we've got different time slots allocated for different topics for us to dive into, largely because we want to make sure we cover a lot of things today. We won't have time to get to every single question and all the finer points, but we're going to try to give you some ideas around each one of them. And then we'll have this final bonus round of live questions at the very end, so we can dive into other things that come up today. And then again, there will be points awarded at the end of each round. Maybe not based on quality of responses, but if there's any type of entertainment value or good quips or good references, or maybe some sympathy points if kids come storming into your little studio setup. So those are the rules. We've got an icebreaker to kind of kick things off. And I want to go to Justin Beasley first. Here's Justin's photo. Justin is Justin, what's your title? I know it just changed.
I'm the Director of Video Services.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, I want to ask you specifically about what's going on behind you in this picture. I know that your daughter has some watercolor skills. Can you share more about that?
Yes, my 8-year-old is constantly doing watercolors, any art really, but watercolors are her favorite. And so my desk is constantly decorated, and she's gotten our 4-year-old like super into it. And so like right now we have fish, we have flowers. So there's always something new, and I always love that. So she's big on making cards for people too. So if you know Jordan, you are a recipient of many a card.
That's awesome. And those are for sale?
That's a good strategy.
We'll spin up an e-commerce site for you later on. Let's go to Tim. Tim is our fearless leader and founder. Tim, I have a question. What are these things going on above your head here?
These horse heads?
Yeah.
Oh, so many people don't realize this, and I'm not one to brag, but we show miniature horses. That's right. It's a thing, and my family absolutely, completely dominates at it. So I'm glad that we're keeping points and score today because game on.
Yeah, it's not an NextAfter event. There's not a competition. It's not always how it always goes. Courtney, what do you do? What's your role here NextAfter? And then also, can you settle a debate? This is kind of an internal debate between our teams. What is this? There's been debate over whether this is a cat or a rug or something else. So can you clarify for us?
Sure. Courtney, I'm Vice President of Optimization here at NextAfter. That is not a cat. That is a rug. It's a cowhide rug. I moved to Texas about 3 years ago. I came from, Chicago, but originally from North Dakota. And I grew up on a farm. So moving to Texas, I fully embraced the whole Western cow culture. So that is a cowhide rug.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for at least entertaining me. Hopefully everybody else is entertained. Let's dive into this. We had the overwhelming amount of questions that we received was about COVID-19 and what do I do right now? And we had a webinar about this back in April. So for those that want to dive deeper, you can go find that webinar and dive in. Tim presented some really interesting data. But I want to chat about it a little bit here as well. So we've got about 10 minutes allocated for us to talk about COVID-19. And a lot of people were asking a very similar question, and I tried to summarize it in this. So Tim, if you want to go first, if you wouldn't mind, what should my messaging look like right now as a fundraiser trying to communicate to donors?
Yeah, so we dug in and looked at hundreds of different organizations and what they were sending. And then we did some experimentation, as we often like to do. And what I've kind of summarized in the webinar is that there's 3 kind of strategies that we observed organizations doing. One is they're an organization that's either directly affected from the COVID-19 crisis, or they're a first responder. They're actually directly engaged in some level of the relief effort, whether that be helping people in need, whether that be addressing things related to policy with the CARES Act. And then there's a third category where people are, simply just, their organization has really nothing to do with COVID-19. Yes, they may be, experiencing some distancing from their donors socially. And so what we tested is 3 different ways of actually addressing that. So one example is if an organization is directly related to actually addressing the crisis in some way, obviously including mention of that in the communications, especially in solicitations, makes a lot of sense. And we saw that it actually had a positive difference when it came to eliciting response. Another organization tested where they took a standard kind of offer, a standard appeal, something that was directly, not directly related to the crisis in any way. And they tried to almost kind of shoehorn that in, almost like sprinkle some relevance into something that is not relevant. And it had a negative effect. So it actually led to a decrease in responses. And third organization just kind of didn't necessarily overtly address the crisis, but actually kind of use this time of, being socially distant as just a subtle way to create relevance. And that actually didn't have an impact one way or another. They weren't trying to necessarily stuff it in an appeal, but they said, look, now more than ever during times like these, so using language like that, it didn't really make a difference one way or another. So those are the three different strategies. So I describe those as natural, forced, or neutral. So you could take one of those three different approaches depending on, really how your organization is responding to this.
Thanks, Tim. Courtney, Justin, any thoughts you would add in there?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I mean, I work with all of the organizations that, work with NextAfter. And so I'm helping to kind of craft some of this messaging with those organizations. We saw a huge shift, starting in March, and completely just change the way that we were communicating with people to be relevant. And that was not just in solicitations and appeals, but in cultivation. I think that was probably where the biggest shift came. And not only in messaging, but also in the quantity of cultivation emails that we sent. We increased the amount of cultivation that we were sending to try and meet those felt needs that people had. And what's really cool about that, for 2 or 3 very specific organizations where we increased cultivation, made it relevant messaging. Of course, we still had appeals going on during that season. We did not, hold back on that, but we saw like a 72% increase in open rates and in email engagement for one. Another one had 39% increase in email engagement. And so we know that relevant messaging is key. Now, I think what's going to be interesting and something that we're starting to tackle now from a messaging standpoint is how much longer is that messaging going to be relevant? And we're actually testing this right now on Facebook. So in March and April, we transitioned a lot of our ads to be very COVID specific. The more that you're spending time with your family, that whole kind of idea behind that. And what we are seeing is that we saw a really strong response with that shift in messaging on Facebook acquisition then, but it's starting to soften a little bit in response. And so I think it's just a matter of kind of monitoring and being aware of what people are feeling. Relevancy is key, but as you can imagine, and as we are all very aware, because we're exposed to this ourselves, we're almost getting like overexposed, and people are wanting to kind of move past that. So I think we're trying to find the balance now of relevant messaging while also moving forward and being sensitive to maybe oversaturation of that.
Yeah. And I just want to add one piece on the end of that. Just something I read this morning from an organization based in the UK called Blue Frog Fundraising. And they have been doing a series of different surveys with donors. And what they found from their survey research is that younger donors just want to move on. They're ready. They're done with this. They want to kind of get past this. Older donors just want to get through this with as little, disruption to their lives and their health as possible. So there's kind of 2 opposing different kind of points of view as it relates to this. But I think the general theme is exactly what Courtney said. People are ready to move on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any thoughts you'd add in there, Justin? We've got other questions we could have into too.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is just don't let fear stop you from communicating. I think that's something that I've seen and heard from various organizations where they don't know what to do. They're afraid of not executing perfectly, so they just don't.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the worst thing that you can do. And it's even an opportunity when you're communicating with people to say I don't know. I don't know how the perfect way to do this, but the mission goes on. And I think that's one of the key things is reminding people of the mission and take those opportunities to invest in people. There are people who have a different rhythm to their lives than they did before. So capitalize on that. Data is showing that this is not an engagement killer at all. In a lot of cases, open and click rates are way up. There are a lot of really positive response rate trends for a lot of organizations. And I think that, yes, you want to be mindful of what this looks like today and what it might look like in the coming weeks and months. But at the same time, don't just stop, don't freeze. Keep communicating, do the best you can, and don't be afraid to solicit feedback from your audience and let them tell you a little bit how they're feeling in their place of life. You know, sometimes it's just asking.
Yeah, that's super helpful. That's super helpful, super insightful. Some deeper questions, I guess getting into more like just larger strategy around how we're fundraising broadly right now. Any perspective on what fundraising looks like in like Q3 and Q4 in terms of, you know, where the economy is heading? And then specifically, this question from Cody, thoughts on fiscal year end, like their fiscal year end ends in June or at the end of June. So how do you handle that type of fundraising right now? Is it even appropriate to fundraise like that?
Well, hold on a second. Let me gaze into my crystal ball, and I'll tell you exactly where we're headed in Q3. I mean, honestly, like nobody really knows. We don't really know this. This is something that has been debated, I think, since everything started to break. What I can tell you is based off of real data that we are tracking, we have been seeing an actual acceleration in response. And I've talked to other groups like technology companies that are, you know, tracking, you know, hundreds of thousands of donations. They're seeing the same exact thing, that there's been this outpouring of generosity, which to me, honestly, like makes me emotional, just thinking the power of just, you know, people that even despite their personal circumstances are continuing to give and to support causes they care deeply about. So I'm not really sure what to say about 3 and 4.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, even just to know that like we're all kind of in the same boat in terms of not knowing what's going on. And hopefully some of those messaging ideas are helpful too, as you, Cody and Carol, you approach fundraising this next couple of months and then Q3, Q4. Question from Jodi. I'm just going to try to keep us moving along. She's saying that they had some type of in-person, I think, fundraising event. They had to cancel. They're wondering, how do we start to message around? Like, we want to encourage people to donate their ticket cost if possible. And just broadly, what do you do about events that have been canceled? How do you handle those? Any thoughts from the gallery here?
I'll just, I mean, I don't have an answer for this.
Sure.
For this. I think that's what's so hard with COVID is that we have the data that we have, and it's great data, but no one has been in this space. And I think to understand what to do, I'll tell you just some things that we're looking at for organizations that have event-based, are rely on a lot of events, is trying to move those digitally. And now when I say that, I'm not saying actually for the sake of acquiring donations from that event, it's actually from a form of cultivation. So again, trying to meet those felt needs of people. What can we do digitally in a live form to connect with people and provide them value? And so that's kind of the position that we're taking. And then to answer or respond to the question about donating their ticket costs, I mean, to me, that's just as simple as communicating the value proposition around what is actually happening right now. Like, you're not the only organization that is dealing with this, you know, and people, we're all in this together. We all understand that this is not just like some like rainy day. This is a global pandemic. You know, like I keep reminding myself and organizations this, like we all are experiencing this. And so any messaging around the fact that like, hey, this was canceled, but the reality is that today and tomorrow and next month and months to come, people rely on us for X, Y, and Z. And we rely on people like you, people who have, again, aligning those beliefs with whatever that cause is. I mean, actually, I think not just donating their ticket cost, but like, this is a great opportunity for recurring giving. I know that we're going to get into that later on, but truly, 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 this is like the prime time for a recurring gift. And I think that that's actually how I would transition that is really honing in on your value proposition around what's happening and do a recurring gift ask.
Yeah, that's cool.
And one last point,
just
Jodi, like when in doubt, you can do one of two things. You can test or you can ask, right? So like, that's the cool thing. If you've done the things that Courtney said of actually like built relationships with these people, then you have the right to ask them. Just say, look, we're not sure what to do about this. You know, here's the reality. This event brings in a lot of revenue, and that'll leave a huge gap. So, you know, what's your advice? I mean, ask your donors for their advice. Oftentimes when you ask for advice, you usually get money.
And transparency, as you had referenced, Tim, transparency is so key. Like, tell them like, we're seeing this is hurting us, you know, and I know that you rely on us for this. So I think that's a huge part.
Yeah, and I think that there's a big piece there too. You know, one, ask, don't tell. I've seen some things that organizations have done that I'm a little worried about the long-term impact of, like, you know, hey, we converted your ticket to a donation and you can email us or call us if you want a refund. I think that gets into territory that's probably very harmful to relationships. So, you know, we want to ask, we want to invite, but I think that the important thing too is to keep the message on the mission, not on the cost. If you focus only on, this is a ticket that is a cost to you and we can move it into this donation as another cost. I think that will be less effective than focusing on, these are the real needs that still exist today, and this is how together we can help meet those needs. You know, just bring it back to the core mission, so that you're not just asking people to, you know, move this intangible money around, but that if they give because they're excited about the mission and vision.
Cool. Thank you all. We're going to jump to the next category here. We're skipping over a couple questions, but for the sake of time. So maybe just even as you're answering these about strategy, about emails, about all the different topics, just kind of keep it in the back of your brain. A lot of these are framed around even just, how do I do this now in this type of period? So kind of keep them in the back of your head as we're talking about these. We're talking largely about, you know, overall strategy. It's a common question that came in just through this webinar, but it's a common question that we've heard for years, which is a lot of people just trying to figure out, like, where in the world do I start with online fundraising? So Courtney, do you want to jump in and just kind of give some type of overview of, you know, what are some of the basics? What are the things you got to keep in mind? If you've got a small email file, you're looking to grow, like what are things you need to keep in mind and put in?
Yeah, I mean, email file is key to any online fundraising program. I mean, every single data point that we've looked at, email is the largest revenue driver for any channel. So email is the name of the game for digital fundraising. So I would say absolutely is acquiring emails. I think we'll get into that in a little bit, just about how to do that. You can acquire emails and donors instantly through paid media like Facebook and Google and all of those. So email, and then in addition to that, as we look at building like an online fundraising program, it's after you're building that, actually simultaneously is communicating with that file. You cannot just acquire these emails, forget about them, and come back in months later and say, oh, hey, by the way, here we are, will you give us money? You know, that onboarding process has to happen at the same time as acquiring the email. So again, welcoming them, aligning their beliefs with yours, adding value to them. Relationship is key. You know, I think just because we're in a digital format doesn't mean that we need to be formal or robotic or anything. In fact, opposite of that, let's be human and personal and relational. That's what people want. That's what they need. That's also what they respond to. And I think even, again, that relevancy of no better time than now, when people are wanting human connection, do we as fundraisers in the digital space have such a huge opportunity to connect with people as people, you know? So, I mean, those are just, there's so much. Obviously you have your donation pages and your data and Google Analytics and all the things, but yes, acquiring emails and cultivating and communicating with them is key.
Cool. Thanks, Courtney. That's awesome. And we're going to get into some of the more specifics about email here in a little bit too, and how you can kind of craft that and be more effective that way. Keeping it at a high level here for a little bit. Tim, do you have any thoughts on this? Should organizations be moving away from designated funds? Question from
Yes.
Sarah.
Next question.
All right. Would you care to elaborate?
No, I mean, like the challenge with designated funds is two things. Number one, it locks up money. So, you know, it doesn't help. If you have a fund that is overfunded, you sometimes can't actually tap into those funds to go and fund another project that is underfunded, right? But the kind of nature of designated funds, I think, is a very organizational centric concept, right? I mean, we position it as this way of you being able to personalize your gift and give directly to the specific area of need. But what ends up happening inside the organization is it's a way just to tidy up our own accounting. It's a way for us to kind of settle like all of our internal squabbles about like who gets which dollar from where. So I just think it's a concept that you should avoid of saying, your gift is going to help this project or others like it. You know what I mean? There's ways just to kind of like open it up so that these funds don't become locked up. So I highly advocate for the abolition of designated funds in all its permutations.
Justin, do you want to give us? Yeah.
Just from that standpoint, think about right now, think about during this COVID-19 crisis, worldwide pandemic, a lot of things have changed. And for a lot of organizations, they're dealing with the fact that they have funds designated somewhere in a program area that they've been cut off of execution on, and other program areas that have sprouted up that have tremendous need and potentially real world, even life-saving impact that could be happening, but those funds are locked away somewhere else right now. So it's just a good reminder that part of the issue with designated funds is that we don't know the future.
Makes sense. Thank you. There's so much more we could talk about with that, but again, we'll keep moving here. This is a pretty common question too, in a lot of different categories, but Beth is wondering, how do we reach a younger audience? Mira was asking, should you, and then how do you target messaging to people that are 50 and up? We've even had some questions about like, hey, I'm trying to build a younger email audience, but I've also have an older email audience. How do I not alienate people? Courtney, if I'll have you start, but any thoughts on just like, how do you manage this level of segmentation? Should you even be pursuing younger audiences versus older audience? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So I'm like, am I really honest here, or should I be kind?
Yes and yes.
So the reality is, yes, let's reach younger audiences, but should they be your priority? No. You have an organization to run, and you have to communicate and target and take care of people who are most likely to give to your organization. And so, of course, that also varies for every organization. And what does younger mean? Younger is that 45, to 35 to 45? Is that 25 to 35? What does younger mean for you? And I think usually what we hear when we hear younger, people are thinking about millennials. Younger, when we think about younger, we're probably thinking Gen Xers, right? So your boomers are normally your donors. And so I would focus the reach around the people who are most likely to support your organization. Now, should you give up on that younger audience and get them content and whatever that looks like? No, I mean, I think it's both and, but I think that you need to be smart about the messaging that you're communicating to that younger audience. Their needs are so very different than a boomer, right? I mean, if you're thinking about content or content offers and acquiring them to your file, you're going to have wildly different motivations and wildly different interests and felt needs of those people. And so you've got to segment that, just from like an advertising perspective, like for instance, on Facebook. I'll let Tim kind of speak to more of this. I know that he's pretty passionate about this, but I mean, this is a common question that comes up. I would just say, do not lose focus on the people who are supporting your organization. Like, you've got to invest in them first.
Yeah. I mean, 50
60 seconds and then we'll move on.
Is the new 13, right? So young is a very relative and fluid concept. When we analyze a lot of clients' donor files, what we find is the typical age of like their typical donor is like 70 years old. And the typical age of their online donor is 70 years old, right? So like young is a very relative concept. I agree with Courtney. I'd say like stay in the 50 plus area of focus. For most organizations, that's probably your sweet spot. How do you go about doing that? I mean, like, that's why I think digital is like, the greatest thing ever, because it gives us the ability to very specifically target people at certain age levels and other demography. So 50 is the new 30.
Thanks so much. And then Justin, do you want to give us like 60 seconds on this? Are there fundraising lessons that we can learn from e-commerce? Anything that you've seen kind of in that field that translates over?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something, I mean, there's so much research that's out there, and so much of it that we are looking to comes from the for-profit space. It tends to be further ahead They tend to do a lot more testing and optimization, and they tend to have a lot larger audience scales to be able to validate tests that may or may not be able to be validated for most nonprofits. And I think that the big thing in like broad strokes, the nonprofit and for-profit space are very similar in the negative factors that affect conversion, when it comes to fundraising, namely friction and anxiety. If you look at most of the case studies that are out there, whether it's Google running them or whether it's another major player in the space, Microsoft has a ton of great research in the e-commerce universe. But when you really dig into it, most of the factors are very similar to what we see when you create long and complicated processes, when you name things in ways that aren't expected to the person who's on the other end of that screen. So it's all the same type of friction triggers that we see in donation processes, and the phrasing that we use, added steps, opportunities to bail out. And that's why you see a lot of the research that we've done validates very similar concepts. Anxiety is another factor. And this is something that I feel like some types of nonprofits maybe get a little bit of a free pass on, but in general, like, everyone has landed from a search engine onto a kind of sketchy looking online storefront that you're not sure of, that maybe the price is a little too good to be true, whatever, but that instantly creates a level of anxiety, and you have to make a choice whether you trust something enough to give it your credit card number. I think that we can learn from that. There's a lot of testing in that space on just how we reinforce things. There's opportunities to use social proof. I mean, our experiment library is full of things that, work to reassure people of security, reassure people of value, and that they're not the only one taking this action. So there's ways that you can address those. And then in general, I think that the big differentiator when we really look at the for-profit versus e-commerce space versus the nonprofit fundraising space is that we don't have a price. We have the opportunity for people to choose to be generous, to inspire generosity. And I think that makes value proposition even more important in our space than in theirs. And you have a lot of these major online retailers that are investing hundreds of millions of dollars to try to eke out tiny margins on products just by reducing friction and making how that product fills your need a little bit better, and that shows the power of it. But we have these the causes that everyone watching represents are transformative to the people that they serve. So it should remind us that we should do that justice when we are communicating, whether it's in our emails, on our donation pages. We have to focus on the value that's provided there. And again, I think that that's a bigger factor, because it not only can choose whether someone converts, if you will, but it also can set what that gift looks like, whether that's a $25 or a $50 or a $5,000 gift.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you, Justin. So good. So good. I'll also throw out there that there's I think Dan, who's one of our developers, uses this site all the time called Baymard Institute, Baymard Institute, and they have a ton of e-commerce research. And there is a lot of stuff I've kind of implemented in our own things and is really informative just for how people view pages in generally, whether it's an e-commerce site or otherwise. So lots of good resources out there. I'm laughing at my time limits at this point because it's funny how long we can talk about some of these different things and barely scratch the surface. But let's move on to donor acquisition. And before we do, I'm not hitting on points every single round, but here's what I've got so far. Tim gets 10 points for being the first one out of the gate to respond. Justin gets 5 additional points for being the most quotable. He had a quote very early on about not living in your fears. And then Courtney gets 5 points because I threw a question out to the group and she was the first one to jump in and answer it. So I'm keeping track and there will be a winner. And it's all very subjective over here. All right, let's talk about
founder or anything that he should
winner. Just saying.
It's handicapped a little bit. All right, here we go. We're talking about donor acquisition. How do I acquire new donors and subscribers? This is essentially the question that I got from probably like 15 to 20 people in different forms. So I won't ask this to a specific person, whoever wants to jump in. Someone want to give an overview of like, what are some common strategies that we can implement or that someone can implement to grow their file and grow their donor base?
I'll start. So, this is a macro finding from a lot of testing work we've done, but people do not naturally go online to give, they go online to get. And I know that sounds like a very simplistic idea, but it's actually very profound, because oftentimes we become very self-centered as fundraisers. We just look at what we're trying to get, which is somebody to come and give me money. And that blinds us to the fact that we have so many amazing things that we can provide to people to deliver value to them first. So when we're coaching an organization, the first thing we do is we start looking at all of the different existing and potential sources of content, right? And they're like, oh no, we don't have content. Yes, you do. Like if you've ever had somebody go speak at one of your events, you have content, right? If you've ever published a blog post, you have content. If you have recorded, videos or audio or radio or you have content. Many organizations are rich in content, they don't know it. But it's about taking that content and repackaging it, repurposing it, turning it into something that represents significant value to your ideal donor, right? And so that takes a little bit of research and a little bit of testing. But that's the first thing, and the first place I'd start is like, what is it that I have that I can use to deliver value to my potential donor so that we can now begin this relationship on the right footing?
That's good. Let's dive into some specific questions. Dan was wondering specifically, are there strategies for reactivating a lapsed donor? Does someone want to talk about that?
I mean, the first thing I'd throw out is that you need to know who these people are. And that's something that you should track closely. It's ideal if you have that in your email system as well. If you're not sending email like through your CRM, sync this data over, make sure that you know who you're talking to, because this is an audience that is really, really helpful to be able to target your messaging around and to speak directly to those types of things. But again, it all starts with having the data, where you need to use it. And I'll let Courtney talk a little bit more to the strategy side of that. But again, it starts with having good data that's actionable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Courtney, want to give like one tactic or tip or strategy?
Sure. So take that file, once you have it, of lapsed donors, upload it to Facebook and target that file on Facebook with content offers. That's one very honestly simple and very cost-effective method to reactivate lapsed donors. Second is also to it's kind of the nuance on the messaging that Justin was saying. Can you reference their last gift date? Can you reference their last gift amount? Speaking to them like we know them and that we value them and their contribution to the organization is going to go a long way.
Thanks, Court. Let's go. Well, yeah, I know we have some thoughts on this and maybe differing thoughts on this within the group. Catherine's wondering, how do I start using text to give?
Justin, go.
I think my first question would be why. And this is something where there are people who are successful, in that space. But the majority of organizations that I know that have gone down that road have had a real challenge getting any real traction to it. It's something that the question is, does your audience, is that a way your audience wants to give? It's also a good reminder that a lot of what we talk about has to do with communicating value and things like that. And it's a difficult medium to do. So it's more suited when you have things like large scale events. You're going to have a number up on the screen. That's a way for people to do like chip in type giving. That can be a good opportunities. Good opportunity there. There's also the question of whether you're talking about like carrier build giving versus, just having SMS numbers that you can text out to and send them a link to a donation form that you host. That really changes a lot of the complexity of management. Carrier build giving is just a real pain to deal with from an accounting standpoint. And a lot of organizations learn that a little late in the process. But I'd also be very careful of contracts in this space. There's a lot of organizations where there will be some commitments that are made to the effectiveness of that platform, but people end up stuck in a contract where they can't move to another platform. Or in some cases, I've even seen contracts where you can't text these people from other systems, even your CRM, because you're in contract. So just as with anything, buyer beware, be very, very careful in that space. But I think that, that question of why comes down to, is it for the organization's desires or is it for the audience's desires?
maybe a good place to start would be text to cultivate as opposed to text to give, right? So like, let's see if you can at least get somebody to respond to one of these text messages, and, don't ask them for money. Maybe, ask them a question, or, give them a report on something that they've, given to in the past, and just see if people engage first before you start asking for money.
Yeah, that's a good point. Tim, I'll ask this question to you and see what thoughts you have. Any data on how to retain peer-to-peer donations, or even just how to implement that in an online fundraising program?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of data. This is actually a gap that I think, we've talked about from a research standpoint. We need to try to fill. I do know that, the churn numbers of people that, participate in peer-to-peer campaigns is rather high. And I think that relates to the fact that, it's usually event specific. It's usually centered around, I'm, participating in this race or this event. I need to raise money because, that's part of my commitment of participating as an advocate, as a donor, as a participant in the race. And then after that, it's kind of like over, right? And so then after they, complete that kind of engagement, the person who gave to their friend through this campaign is not necessarily like really that sold on the cause. They were sold on the cause because the cause was important to their friend. So, there's lots of things that I think would be really fun to experiment with, like, how do we follow up with these donors that have given through a peer-to-peer campaign? How do we connect them to the organization? How do we ask them questions? Maybe start by trying to be interested as opposed to trying to be interesting, and like tell them all the cool things about ourselves, right? Like that's what we often do as nonprofits, as people, we kind of like rattle off our resume and say, like this, share this, post this, instead of just saying, hey, is this something you even care about, right? So, lots of questions, not a lot of answers as it relates to this.
Yeah, which makes sense. But yeah, as we have more data around that, we'll share that with you, or come across new resources, we're happy to share that stuff. Let's jump into email fundraising. Lots we can talk about in terms of email, but let's come right out of the gate. Jen is wondering, how many emails is too many? At what point are you sending so much that people start unsubscribing? Is there like a ideal number or frequency? Courtney, you send a lot of emails and set up a lot of those for different organizations. Any thoughts on that?
There's no magic number. I think that that's really important to first say, like, we don't have a magical solution or, some kind of heuristic to tell you to calculate the number of emails you should send. What I would say, though, is that I think you'd be surprised at the number of emails is too many. We tend to send quite a few emails, but not for the sake of sending more emails. We're sending emails to add value and to connect with people, engage, foster that relationship. I mentioned that earlier on. Like, the whole point of fundraising and your space is to foster a relationship with people on your file. And if I'm just going to go to them once a month with an ask, I'm abusing that relationship, right? So, like, truly think about it as a friendship or a relationship. Like, how would you treat your friend? Would you communicate, like that to them? And so I would just say, like, always add more value. Cultivation is key. Of course, we have to ask. And so one thing that we have done for a lot of organizations is we've gone into programs where their email program is like an appeal every single week, 4 appeals a week. And they're seeing little to no response from them. And what we've done is we'll completely flip that program on its head and substitute all of those appeals with value add and cultivation, and focus the ask around like 1 to 2 a month. And again, that's not some like magic formula, but what we have seen is that email engagements increase, the health of the email file increases, and the response from appeals increases as well, not just from even, donor conversion, but revenue. People are giving more generously because we're feeding into them. And so, I would just say monitor your response, but if you're sending more appeals than you are cultivation, then I'm going to tell you that you're probably doing it wrong.
It's good.
We can't see this name, so I'm just going to assume that this is Dr. Jen Shang from the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. So I'll use her answer, which is like, it's not possible if you're sending the right kind of emails to send too many, right? Because the idea, and a lot of their research is focused on how like fundraising, if done properly, actually creates a better person, right? It actually helps donors. It makes them more, have better well-being. And why would you want to make somebody, have less of their total potential well-being? So it's not a question of quantity. It's a question of quality and, type of messages. So.
And I'd add to this, so this question is often born from watching only the negative statistics. If you look at attrition over time, people who are unsubscribing or things like that, that can look like I'm sending more email, I'm getting more opt-outs, that's the problem. Whereas we tend to view an opt-out is just a relational cue. It's an opportunity to adjust to someone else's expectation. Not everyone will stay on your email file forever. And when you're emailing people more often, they have more opportunities to step out. So you can't just watch the attrition. You also have to look at the engaged email file, because you may see an increase as you start to send more, even cultivation email. You may see an increase in unsubscribes, but you may also see a proportionally larger increase to your active email file, people who are engaging regularly, the type of engagement that they have. And so it's just important to not only have a negative metric as a goal, because the only way to not get any unsubscribes is to not send any email.
Great point. Here's a bunch of questions, and they all largely revolve around this idea of how do I get more people to open my emails? So what are some common strategies that have been implemented or tested to kind of crack the code here on how do I get more people to actually engage with my content? Courtney, I'll throw it back to you. Yeah.
I'm like, we've got a whole course on this.
Right.
Is this where
I didn't want to say it.
Well, I'll say it.
I was like, Nathan,
because
you teach on this all the time. I mean, we put it into practice. You teach on it all the time. I jump in. This is so you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, to answer kind of all these questions, you obviously can go to courses.nextafter.com. You can dive into a full-blown course, and there's so much testing and so much data around all these different things. But how to get more people to open to email, if you're trying to like really boil this down into, a larger principle, like just be a person, just be a human being. One of the most common tests that we run, experiments that we've run is, testing an organization that's been sending from the name of the organization. And then they start sending from a human being and a real person that can actually reply as a human being. And you see it affects every metric, not just opens, but it sets the tone for the rest of the email. So if you believe that a real human is connecting with you in a real human way, you're inclined to reply, you're inclined to read, you're inclined to take an action, because that's the expectation of that's the design of the whole medium of email, is to have a personal relationship. So does it make sense to send a resend? As in like, hey, I just want to check in and make sure that you saw this. Like you can kind of phrase it in that way instead of just, I'm just going to copy and paste this email and I'm going to send it to them again and send it to them again until they open. Like just check in like a human being. What times to send? There's so much testing that you can do around trying to figure out, should I send in the morning? Should I send in the afternoons? And there, you might find some different trends within your own audience. But again, just consider how people interact with email. People like to check email first thing of the day. So maybe you want to be first in the inbox. At the same time, you could test and realize that everybody's in the inbox at the same time, and I get better response rates if I send at a unique time. So hard to give a clear, definitive answer on that one. And then tools to create better subject lines. If you go to our resources page, and I can actually send this out later too, nextafter.com/resources, we have a little worksheet that guides you through 5 key principles that you can build into your subject lines that are kind of proven using psychology to figure out what actually is going to make people tick and open an email. So that's a lot.
Who created that worksheet? Who created that worksheet, Nathan?
Well,
that's
I don't want to brag, but
Plus 10 for you, Nathan.
10 points for Nathan.
all right, cool. By the way, I gave Justin and Courtney both 5 points because they I'm watching The Last Dance, which is that Bulls documentary. You see the dynamic duo of Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan. There was a moment there where like Justin gave some theory, He teed it up to Courtney. You slammed it home with a real tactical idea. So good 5 points.
Listen, take note that I slammed it home, which means I'm probably more like Michael Jordan. You're in the Scottie Pippen.
Okay.
Oh man.
And I'm assuming you're just taking points away from me at this point. So.
Pretty much. All right, let's actually move on from email, because there's a lot we can talk about there, but we can come back to some of these questions at the end. I want to get to some other topics. Let's see. Let's talk about recurring giving for a little bit. Really, one question around recurring giving, which is, how do you build a recurring giving program? Are there specific strategies? Are there donors that look more like they would become a recurring donor? So use giving clubs. Like, any thoughts on this? Tim, do you want to jump into this?
No way, Courtney, 100%. Done.
All right. 5 points for being selfless.
Oh my gosh. Oh man, there's so much around this. I'm pretty passionate about recurring giving, especially right now in this season. I think I've ran a handful of recurring gift campaigns in the last month. First of all, like, just ask. I think that's like, it sounds so simple, but like, I think that we make it way more complex than it needs to be. And I think that we always think that we need to have this like name in place, and we need to have the ongoing stewardship in place, and we need to have X, Y, and Z and all of those things. And maybe it's good to have those things in place, but you also just need to just jump in and ask people to give on an ongoing basis, because what we're seeing is that people are very likely to do that. They want to support you on an ongoing basis. We have a lot of testing in this area as well. I think it's also like, why are people giving on an ongoing basis? Like, honing in on the why is critical. I think that the why is for an ongoing gift, a monthly gift, is very different than just a one-time gift. We've done a lot of shifts in messaging with organizations around this. A lot of people are like, become a XYZ partner. What does that even tell me? What does it actually communicate to me about the impact that I'm having, with my ongoing, generosity? Nothing. It tells me nothing. And so, like, get outside of like some fancy name and club, but like focus on the why behind it and ask. And then after you ask, like, steward those people. We talk so much about cultivation, but you've got to continue to remind them of what their gift is doing. Like, send out monthly emails. Again, very relational, very personal, about, hey, your gift did this. Send them pictures, whatever that is. Just be very real with them. I've heard a couple of people like, we don't want to remind them that their gift is coming out every month. It's like, why not? Like, this is an opportunity to reinforce the why, not bring fear that they're going to cancel their recurring gift. So, ask, really hone in on a value proposition, and then be good stewards to them. Send them emails, call them, send them notes. I was just talking with a colleague on our team, and she had asked, like, what are some things that we can do to donors to just like from a retention standpoint? I'm like, there's this unique thing about this unexpected surprise that we can give donors. I even think, like, as we've been all quarantined, I've had a random delivery at the door from like my mom sending me a care package, or a friend sending me flowers, or chalk for my kids at the doorstep. Like, those are pleasant surprises and make me feel good. Like, what are those pleasant surprises that we can give these recurring donors on an ongoing basis? Is that a note? Is that a phone call? Just to truly say thank you. So
I'm so glad you said that, Courtney. Just ask. Just quick story. It reminds me of, like, there's this, when I was in high school, this cute underclassman that I had a crush on, and I wanted to ask her to homecoming. And so I went to all these lengths. I tried to pull out all the stops. I rigged the school computer match so we were 100% compatible, which is impossible. I broke into her locker and put flowers and stuff. And then I finally got up the courage and asked her. She's like, yeah, of course. She's like, I thought you'd never ask. So yeah, just ask sometimes. That's all.
I'd say specifically to recurring, I mean, it's such a valuable audience. I mean, they retain longer, their lifetime value goes up significantly, but like those are the things that they do for the organization. But for them, they care about your program. They care enough for this to be part of their normal routine. So like Courtney said, I mean, definitely keep following up, keep cultivating, tell them what their gift is doing and give them that recognition. But also I really advise against suppressing them from like things like year-end fundraising. A lot of organizations do that, but this is an incredibly generous audience and they're very likely to make additional gifts. And typically we see that anywhere from 20 to 35% of these donors' value will be from additional one-time gifts that people make. And it's also an audience that is more likely to move up into mid or major levels. There's lots of opportunities there, and from a data standpoint, we can see them, but it all starts with that relationship.
That's good. Thank you all. That's super helpful. That's super helpful. Let's talk about this, Justin. This is your thing, I think. Let's talk about tools. Are there any? This is specifically asking about for smaller nonprofits. Are there any CRMs that you would recommend? But even just kind of maybe even an overview on what you should look for in maybe a CRM tool.
Yeah,
any
absolutely.
thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think that there's always the challenge, especially for smaller organizations where a lot of tools, don't quite fit them. They either don't fit their budget or they require a lot of onboarding or training. And so that's always going to be a challenge in finding sort of a right-sized tool. For smaller nonprofits in general, you may look at things like, a Kindful or a Neon CRM. If you're on the larger end of that, maybe, something toward like a Virtuous or, there's a lot of tools that are out there that you could use to start sort of comparing. But as far as choosing tools, the things that we look for in every tool, whether it's a CRM or an email system, we want to know that we can, execute on strategic campaigns. If a tool doesn't have the ability for us to properly track the life cycle of our donors, if we can't see good engagement data for email, that is a huge limiting factor in our ability to make sure that we're communicating in a relational way, and it's going to hurt our results. But that's not always, those things aren't always best served in the same system. So we also look for interoperability. We want to see things like data exports and APIs so that we can tie systems together. And sometimes the solution may not be one system. Very rarely do I recommend that people use their CRM for like their full list emails. Sometimes there's a lot to be said for having sort of the best of breed tool in an area. And there may be overlap, maybe folks use their CRM for smaller groups or, mid-level donors, and maybe they're using an email system for something else. But the reality is most people are going to have multiple systems. They're going to need to tie it into their donation pages. They're going to need to tie it into their email acquisition forms. They may need to hook it up to Zapier to talk to some other system that doesn't have an out-of-the-box integration. So from that standpoint, we always look for APIs. We always look for things that are easy to get data in and out of. And I think that principle sort of lets you grow maybe past what a lot of tools were built for and focus on their strengths. And it also means that you're not going to be completely locked in. That there's ways to get your data in and out. And you can be strategic and decide where is the best value, for me. And Mailchimp has gotten a lot of people in the email universe. And it's always been one of those like good enough systems at a low enough price point that for the email world, that's really great. The things that you can do in the HubSpot, workflow automation are far more robust. So you have to sort of find your needs and figure out what is the biggest priority right now. And for a lot of organizations, that's going to be in like their mass market appeals. So email system may be, a different investment time frame than like, a more robust CRM. Maybe you can tie some tools together, but the big thing is you have to be able to integrate.
Cool. Thank you, Justin. Hopefully that's super helpful. Yeah, it's good insight. A quick question I can answer here. What software do you use to write emails? If this is about us specifically, NextAfter, we use HubSpot for all of our email marketing and often recommend HubSpot. It's incredibly powerful. If you're talking specifically about writing emails, I know there's some tools we've even been talking about in a Slack channel out there to kind of evaluate copy and that sort of stuff. But there's lots of those like grammar tech tools that you can find just with a quick search. And then let's talk about this one quick. How do you build an internal library of tests? Tim, this one seems kind of like your expertise here.
I get the softball question.
Yeah, you do.
Well, it just so happens, Nathan, that we've actually built a tool. It's free. It's called Winston Knows. Winston, as in Winston Churchill, KNOWS. And it integrates with all major testing platforms. It pulls the data into a dashboard so you can monitor your laboratory. Once a test reaches a large enough sample and it's got enough data points and it's statistically valid, it'll prompt you, you hit a button, it grabs screenshots of the creative, it grabs a snapshot of the data, and then it prompts you to answer the research questions so you can properly document and warehouse the learnings that come from that experiment. So check that out. We built that for ourselves. It's like in several iterations. We started opening up to other organizations. I think we've got hundreds of different organizations that use it today. And it's, the goal of it is really just to help unlock the learnings. I mean, if you're a person, you're doing tests, you're running experiments inside your organization, how do you socialize those? How do you go and pull those up really quickly, when you're in a meeting with your boss or something, and prove like, look, we don't need to go do this stupid idea again because we've already tested it and it doesn't work. I mean, like sometimes testing can be like a sword and a shield, right? It can kill bad ideas or it can protect you from even worse ones. So check out Winston Knows, and
that costs what, like $1.99 a month or something?
It's free.
Oh, it's free.
Oh, it's free.
All right, so we're at time. It is 2:01. If you've got to go, I understand, but we can stick around for a few more minutes here and try to answer some of these miscellaneous questions that came in. I know we've got more coming through the chat here too. Let's answer a couple of these miscellaneous questions, and then we can go to some of these in the chat, and then we'll shut it down here around 2:10, 2:15. All right, here we go. Miscellaneous questions. This is a funny question. Do you have any opinions about direct mail? And before I throw it to anybody, a common phrase I hear around NextAfter is we have an opinion about everything, all the way from direct mail to the size of a salad. What's the optimal size of a salad container? Lots of interesting debates at lunchtime. But I'm going to throw this one, Justin. I'm curious your thoughts. Do you have opinions about direct mail?
Yeah, I think that, overall, obviously a lot of organizations have really good direct mail programs. I think that, if you have an established direct mail program, we're like, my opinion is definitely not anti-direct mail. It's a good thing. It's a good tool, but it's definitely both and. And there are things that you can be doing with digital. We've done testing into reinforcing direct mail with digital, like cultivation, things of that nature. We've tested using direct mail audiences, even modeled audiences, being used for direct mail acquisition. These two things should be in the same universe. As far as pre-COVID and now, I think it's going to be too soon for a lot of people to know, what those results are going to look like. I think that early results are probably going to be very skewed from what we see as things go on. But there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that in general, it's a tool. It's, and like a lot of tools, it has its place. For a lot of people right now, I don't know if I was building an organization right now, how big a part I would start in direct mail, because there is the cost there. And so that's something that, yes, if you have the audience and if you can acquire donors for, a good range, which depends a lot on, the type of organization you are, the type of cause, but building a direct mail file takes time and money. And that's something that you can often test in cheaper in digital.
Makes sense.
Direct mail is still the direct response king. We will not ever dispute that. We love it. We think it's awesome. So, I hope it lives forever. But all Justin's points are valid that, there's opportunities to kind of like merge these things together in a way where it's not just, 1 + 1 = 2, but it becomes like a multiplying effect. So that's the fun stuff, which we can talk about in another webinar, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. All right. What's the best way to thank donors? Courtney, I think you mentioned something about thanking recurring donors specifically. What's the best way? Should you write them all notes? Should you call everybody? Should you email them? Email them? All of the above?
Yeah, yes. I will say this: if you don't have a new donor welcome series, onboarding series in place, do that first, because it's an automated way to thank them. You don't have to, start to think about how to do that. And really what that is, if you're not familiar with what it is it's just like a new name welcome series, but specific to donors. So some of those emails might be just like completely just over and above celebrating them as a donor, appreciating them, reminding them or telling them what their gift is doing, even asking them like, hey, why did you give? We're curious, and encourage a reply back. Again, that fostering the relationship is huge. But that can be an automated series that triggers the moment someone makes a gift, and then consistent cultivation with them. We use a platform called Sly Broadcast to send voicemails to people, whether that's once a month or a couple times a month, whatever that looks like for your organization. But yeah, I mean, I think you're never gonna thank a donor too much. I think it's a matter of like the most common thing that I see is the moment we get a gift, we somehow become I don't know, just like not very appreciative and very focused on ourselves again. And so I would just say, like, continue to stay focused on the donor, that the donor is the person who is making your organization possible and the work possible. Celebrate them. It's not about this now, like this organization is able to do this. It's actually like you helped to feed XYZ or this many children. Like, it's about them. So I would just say, be very conscious of the language you use.
Thank you. Chelsea's wondering, what's the name of that program that you mentioned to send voicemails?
Sly Broadcast. It's a platform online. It's really inexpensive.
Yeah,
so Sly
super
Broadcast.
cheap, integrates with a bunch of stuff, so you can automate everything. It's wonderful. If you've ever gotten a random voicemail call from Brady Josephson recently, it might be from Sly Broadcast. Let's see. Are there any best practices for handling employer matching? We just had a long Slack conversation about this the other day. I'll share a couple of things just from that. One of our employees used to work at a university and had implemented some different strategies there. Basically, some thoughts on it is it's really hard and kind of really friction heavy to implement this directly on a donation page oftentimes, but making this like a follow-up call to action on a confirmation page after a donation can be really effective. Maybe it's a checkbox that cues that on a confirmation page or something like that. But what they had done specifically was actually build an email campaign. They could identify who the employer was, and they knew that there's a high likelihood that their employer would match, or a high likelihood that they worked for an employer that would match. And they'd run them through this email campaign, set a time limit on it, and use email to try to drive that, as opposed to trying to build it into the form that gets like really clunky and can create a lot of friction. So there's just a few thoughts there. And then I want to get to Giving Tuesday now. I know that some of the organizations we work with are running these campaigns. I guess two questions. How do you leverage Giving Tuesday in an effective way? Aren't you just kind of like taking donations from other people? And then any results on how Giving Tuesday now went?
Courtney?
Yeah, I know you ran a bunch of these.
Back to you, Courtney.
Giving Tuesday now are two very different things. I want to make sure that that's communicated. When we dove into Giving Tuesday Now campaigns, we said, how are we going to measure success? Well, there's never been a Giving Tuesday Now. We've never been in a global pandemic, and motivations are very different of donors and non-donors now than they are during Giving Tuesday in the fall. So should you take advantage of these giving days? I'm gonna say absolutely. I think you're gonna be missing out if you don't. I think it's a matter of how you message it. Actually just ran a test during Giving Tuesday now with an organization. We're looking at non-donors and donors, and for a donor, when we led with messaging around Giving Tuesday now, we had a stronger response, where a non-donor actually responded stronger when you led with like missional value proposition about the organization, which kind of makes sense, right? So someone who's a donor is already invested in your organization. They know what you do, they believe in you, but they see a cool giving opportunity, they want to jump in. Where a non-donor that's maybe even scary to them. So maybe just think about what you're leading with in your communication, but test into that. This is just one case study that we did just this past week. Giving Tuesday Now was a huge success, whatever we want to base that off of. A lot of the approach that we took with Giving Tuesday Now, again, in light of everything going on, is we took advantage of doing recurring giving asks during that season. And this is why. The effects of COVID aren't just happening today. They're not just going to be ending this month. But again, it lends itself well, the effects, how terrible it is, it lends itself well to a recurring gift ask, because people are going to be impacted for a long, long time. So why not, position your ask in that way? But yeah, I mean, I think if you can do what we have done and seen great success with is if you can get a match or a grant or something like that for those special days. The unique factor about those giving days is that there's urgency already built into them. And we know that urgency drives conversion. And so using language like, give by midnight tonight on this one day, this one global day of giving, we really see a huge response in those final hours when you can use that urgency to increase motivation.
Cool. Thank you, Courtney. Super, super insightful. Thank y'all for being here today. This has been a lot of fun for me, hopefully for the three of you, and hopefully for everyone who's watching too. Just a reminder, you can check out this virtual workshop, nextafter.com/virtual-workshop. This will be on May 27th. We'll spend a whole day with a couple of us talking about online fundraising optimization. You can get a certification afterwards. If you want to dive really deep into a lot of these topics that we've covered today, we have a bunch of courses available at courses.nextafter.com, but specifically, you can become a member. You get access to every single course, starting at $49 a month. You get access to everything, all the certification courses, and you'll be certified once you complete them. And there's a lot of other perks that go into this too, so you can check out more at nextafter.com/membership. And if you use the discount code work from home trial, you can actually try it out for free for a month. So make sure you take advantage of that. We're over time. We still got a few people, hanging on. I'm wondering from the three of you though, do you have any closing words, closing thoughts, closing encouragement for people trying to figure out just different ways of growing during such a crazy time?
I mean, just remember the opening song from this morning, optimization theme song that, everyone will be dancing when we're doing it right. So how do you do it? No, I'm just joking. So, I mean, I think, look, this is such a great, I'm just going to speak from my personal experience of being, separated from what has been my usual life, which is like spending time going back and forth to different places on airplanes and running all around. So having this additional time to spend, really to think about what are some things that I can get better at, in my work, right? And I think that's maybe something for all of us to think about. How can we use this time where we're kind of detached from our regular routines to invest in really building up a new skill set? And I'm not, obviously we'd love it if you think it's digital fundraising and you want to go deep in that area, but maybe ask yourself that question and say, how do I use this and redeem this time in a way, right? And use it, for, some self-edification. So that would be my parting advice.
Justin, Courtney, any final words?
I think I just throw out there that, there has been a huge change. You can't expect the same level of productivity that you're used to because your rhythm's completely off. You're juggling, whether it's school from home or whatever else is going on in your life, give yourself some grace. But also let that drive your empathy for your donors and your constituents. Empathy. Figure out their context has changed too. So you can't talk to them the same way you've talked to them all along. So take that grace you show yourself and show some to them, and make sure that you're aware of their context as well. I think that that's just something we can all do and be a bit better for it.
Yeah, and
Courtney, bring us home.
I'm just gonna say this, in that that whole don't be scared to ask, right? So we know that people are hurting and there's job loss and people are in really, really difficult situations. And our instant thing is to fear, as Justin had said, don't fear. And that is so true right now, is while there are people that are struggling and maybe can't give to your organization right now, there are still so many people that can give. And I think more than ever, like those people who are willing and able to give are looking for opportunities to help and to give. And so they're not going to know where or what or how to give if we don't ask them and present that ask to them. And that is absolutely what we're seeing. When we're asking, people are responding, and it's honestly so encouraging and exciting. But I would just say, like, now is not a time to not ask. People want to help and want to get involved. And so let's give them that opportunity.
Well, thanks so much. A final point tally here. I've got 20 points total for Tim. I gave 5 extra points to Justin for an inspiring comment there in his closing arguments, which brings us to 15 points. Courtney had 15 points. I gave her an extra 5 for being a total pro and being the most deferred to. But the big surprise, I win. I gave myself 50 points for being an incredible host.
Oh,
So thanks for playing this round of
paycheck this week, Nathan. Oh,
well, I win this round of Whose Webinar Is It Anyway? Thank you so much for playing. And thank you so much, all of you who've stuck around this long for all these questions. If you have additional ones, feel free to shoot them my way in an email, nathan@nextafter.com, and then we'll try to get you some responses. Thank you all so much. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.